Hi, this is Travis here at Exerciselab with another video for you guys. So I'm a doctor of physical therapy, for those of you who don't know me, and a little bit of a product review type video today. I'm going to be talking about, what's effectively known as a flexible barbell. There's a few of them out there, Earthquake Bar being one of them. I think that was one of the first players around. This thing's called the Tsunami Bar. I'm not necessarily beholden to one or the other, but I want to talk about the Tsunami Bar specifically. I think it is a pretty good product, and I'll be telling you why. But I'll also be peppering in, who do I think is a good candidate for it. I don't necessarily think it's for everybody per se. And then, as I always like to put my own sauce on it, being a physical therapist, what are the rehab applications? What's the literature saying about these things? And then maybe what else could we be doing with this bar that maybe we're not doing a lot of right now? So I'll be putting my 2 cents on all that stuff today. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about it, go ahead and stay tuned, and we'll get started. All right, so just to quickly show you guys, this thing comes with different Kroc Locks. There's this Kroc Lock here, and this bigger one, which comes with this locking pin. And so I actually got another set, so I have a little more room to play around. But what's cool about, because these are going to slide during your workout, and you may or may not want that. Sometimes I like to just kind of have it dialed in a certain place. And so what I might do is I might come in here with a Kroc Lock down here, for instance, and I can slide my plate down that way. And I have another one behind it that I can sometimes also use to keep it pressed there if I wanted. So sometimes you might want this thing to be sliding as you're doing a workout, or sometimes you just want it to stay put. And so you have a little more room to play around with this when you have 2 Kroc Locks. And so I've got one behind it now, and again, I've got this one in front, so I could decide I want that much travel, or again, I could come in here a little closer and decide I only want a little bit of travel, or obviously I can come butted up right against here. I don't want this thing to move at all, and so obviously that's going to minimize the oscillations. And then what you might have seen is you come in here, I can obviously add another plate, and I don't necessarily have to have these spacing, but I can. Then you put that outer one. This is kind of the one that really locks it in place, because the other one still can slide a little bit. This one, obviously, by having that pin, is not really going to slide. And so I can have this here. And then now what I can do is I could push this one all the way out if I wanted. And I could even, again, not have this inner one if I didn't want it. But maybe I could decide that inner one, I want to have this one, say, halfway. So what's kind of cool about this is there's a lot of different configurations you can play around on this as far as how you want your spacing to be. The farther out, the more this bar is going to tend to oscillate. And so again, if you want that, really heightened oscillatory effect, then obviously you're going to want to put your plates, probably without this middle one, and push them both to the end. But again, you could just play around with it. Maybe it's a little strong for you all the way out, so you cut it halfway or something like that. So again, you can just play around with it, see how much of an oscillatory effect you want. And again, part of that's going to depend on your goals and just kind of your familiarity with this and sort of knowing where you want to land. In the very beginning, though, you're going to probably want to start out a little closer, maybe a little farther away from the end. And again, you might want to use that outer one to lock it here rather than letting it slide down, just to kind of get, a feel of how this thing works. Familiarize yourself with it first, and then start creeping yourself out towards the end. All right, and so this isn't one of those things where you're trying to be real slow and deliberate with it. So you're not going to come down in here, nice and controlled, and then bring it up, or, set it down for a nice pause on the chest, and then bring it up. You're trying to get this thing to move. And so you really want to try to get that oscillatory effect, because that's what's really going to recruit more of those high threshold motor units. So you're trying to give those things some speed. And the idea is the more speed you give it, the more you basically get that oscillation going to really make those stabilizers and things like that kick in. So that's going to give you that neuromuscular effect, that neural drive, and perhaps increase that strength and power. And so that's really what you're trying to do with the Tsunami Bar. So a little bit of a different philosophy maybe than how a power lifter might take a real heavy load with a traditional barbell. All right, so the idea with this Tsunami Bar is it's basically kind of like a flexible housing that encases this piece of fiberglass. It's also semi-rigid. And so that's what kind of allows this bar to have that play and that give to it. And the thing with this bar is you're not necessarily trying to train at your 1 rep max. You're training more for kind of speed and power. So you're going to probably be somewhere between about your, say 30 to 60% 1 rep max. And I've spoken to that in other videos, so I won't necessarily cover it at length here. But for those of you who don't know, your 1 rep max is basically just how much weight can you lift in 1 repetition, and that would be, again, with a standard barbell. So to make the math easy, say if your 1 rep max is about 200 pounds, So then you take 60% of 200, which I guess would give you like 120 by my math at least. I hope that's right. Yeah, I think it is. So 120 pounds would be what you would want to use here. And that's going to basically give you a little bit more of that ability to move this bar quickly. And one study did actually show that their participants, I think they were Division I level football players, stayed a little tighter actually with this bar, meaning those stabilizer muscles were probably firing a little bit stronger. They didn't have as much activation of their prime movers, so the muscles you're trying to get after. What I would say with this bar, though, is you're also not using as much load. And so that's probably why that study showed that effect. You know, familiarization and training may minimize that. So say if your participants were a little more familiar with this bar, that might be minimized. The other thing to think about too, though, is it's not like it has to be all or none. So say if you did really want to achieve muscle hypertrophy of your chest, you're going to probably want to do other things. Maybe even pre-exhaust those muscles a little more first, then come in here and hit this. But I think it's just kind of a cool way to add a little bit more variety into, say, a traditional, bench pressing type of routine. So certainly if you're just kind of new to the iron game, so to speak, and just trying to, develop a base, you definitely aren't going to probably need this thing. This is probably a little more for your strength and power athlete. Maybe somebody who's been a little more seasoned, been training for a while, and that person needs maybe a little bit of novelty to try to, bust through a plateau, give them something a little extra. So, say for instance, you're working bench, trying to bring it up, doing bench twice a week. Maybe you could, pick something like this up, and then every other workout, maybe add it in for kind of like a little short, mesocycle as they call it. Or maybe just do a short period where you're going to maybe spend 3 weeks working this bar, come back to a traditional barbell, see if you're able to bring that up a little bit. One cool thing, which they were using this more for lower extremities and squats, it didn't have a big impact on a vertical jump test, but it did seem to improve the long jump a little bit, which is kind of interesting. In the lower extremity, it seemed to work. In the chest and sort of the pecs, it hasn't necessarily been studied as, I guess you could say rigorously. So the jury's maybe still a little bit out, but those things I just mentioned, I think could be a useful way to use and incorporate this bar. All right, then I want to speak to rehab-related applications. Is there a use for something like this in, say, somebody with shoulder injury? And I would say maybe. So where I think this thing may also be able to shine, which, again, there isn't really literature to support this because it really hasn't been done. But, anytime you can exploit, basically what you would call submaximal load, I think it can be a valuable thing for rehab. And I spoke to that in the BFR video. If you put a BFR band on, and that allows you to get a little more out of less, so to speak, you still get a potent hypertrophy response from a lower load, that certainly can be valuable for somebody who can't necessarily lift all that load. So one of the things I think we're going to see, in this whole longevity, interest that the fitness industry is kind of really going into now, is that, we want to be able to do joint sparing exercises. Again, I've spoken to so many older bodybuilders, and they all say that, my orthopedist says I've got the worst shoulders he's ever seen. And I don't think that we want to be that person anymore. We still want to be strong. We still want to, aesthetically look good, so to speak, perhaps. But we don't necessarily want to be paying the piper for those gains in the way that some of the old school, bodybuilders and power lifters had to. And so anytime you can come in with a little bit of a lighter load, that's less stress that the joint is going to be seeing. And maybe the muscle still gets a similar, effect by incorporating that oscillatory movement. Maybe you're able to get a little bit more to that muscle, recruit those high threshold motor units. And, again, we know that one of the hallmarks of aging seems to be the reduction in the atrophy of those type 2 muscle fibers, which again are your speed and power. So perhaps if I could use something like this, I can continue to, really challenge that system in a way where my joints don't have to see as much stress, then maybe I can be the guy where, I don't necessarily have those horrible shoulders the way that some of those bodybuilders did. And so I think that's probably an area where this could definitely be applicable. And so, back when I was seeing a lot of acute rotator cuff tears and post-op repairs and things like that, I didn't necessarily have access to one of these. I didn't really know much about it. And so I wasn't using it, but I think I probably would now. And I think I would do that to try to see if I could nudge that hypertrophy response a little bit as we're having a soft pedal load. Because, one of the things, again, after you're going to have, ACL repair, after you had a rotator cuff repair, you have to really be pretty ginger with the loading. And, that's really one of the factors that I think makes it such a tough recovery. And so anything we can do to try to heighten that anabolic response, try to preserve the muscle mass, attenuate the loss, and also accelerate the gains while we're not necessarily babying, but, going a little softer on the loading, this might be one way to do it. So I don't necessarily know that I would do this exclusively. I definitely don't think I would actually, but I might incorporate it. And so I'd love to see that, maybe done in a study where you take one group with a more conventional, rotator cuff repair and, take them through a standard protocol, and then also have another group where you at least incorporate this. And again, maybe not exclusively, and kind of see what happens. Differences may not be significant, but they could. And so again, anybody who's really looking for that little bit of extra, not everyone's going to necessarily want that, but the people that really just want to do everything in their power to really nudge those gains along, and this might be able to do something for you. And so again, it doesn't have to be by itself. So you certainly could also incorporate some BFR. You certainly could also incorporate other strategies that I've spoken to in this channel on how you might be able to, nudge that hypertrophy response along a little bit. To be clear though, I think this is a specialty item. If you're fairly new to strength training and you haven't built up that foundation, I wouldn't worry about, touching one of these things, or certainly buying one. If you happen to have one laying around your gym, then great. But if you're somebody who's maybe on a budget, I wouldn't necessarily say get this thing, at least not yet. And, on that rehab note, it actually does kind of remind me of a body blade. I don't know if you guys know what those were, but it was kind of a long blade device, and, you would shake them and oscillate them in different ways after shoulder injuries. For whatever reason, I don't really see them around in clinics. We used them for a little while. And I think part of it is, when you give somebody a home exercise program, you're not going to give them a body blade to go home with. And, they'd use them in the clinic for a while, but ultimately I think there were just better tools in the tool chest, so they kind of fell off. But in the event, I think this is a pretty cool thing. Hopefully it's going to stay around. I wanted to bring it to you guys here at Exerciselab. So definitely let me know what you guys think. Comment below, and certainly subscribe if you like this stuff. More good content in the pipeline. As always, I hope you guys have some fun.